Everyone thinks change begins with a choice. It doesn't. It begins with a small crack, a message, a glance, a silence you can't ignore. I wasn't looking for anything. But something was already looking for me. I woke up before the alarm, again. The same gray light pushed through the blinds like an unwanted guest, too early to be polite, too dim to be hopeful. I stared at the ceiling, tracing the faint cracks that had formed over the years, wondering if they were new or if I had just started noticing them. That's how it always began, not with decisions, but with small, irrelevant thoughts that filled the space where meaning should have been. I'd lie there, counting imperfections, both on the ceiling and inside myself. The city outside was already alive, cars humming like distant bees, the occasional shout or laughter cutting through the air. I used to love that sound, the morning noise, proof that life was happening somewhere close. Lately, though, it just reminded me how far away I'd drifted from all of it. I wasn't unhappy, at least not in the tragic, movie scene kind of way. It was subtler than that. More like walking through fog, knowing there's a path but never quite seeing it clearly enough to follow. I made coffee without tasting it, stared at my reflection in the microwave door. The warped metal gave me two versions of myself, slightly off-center, as if even the universe wasn't sure where exactly I belonged. My phone buzzed on the counter, messages from work, notifications I didn't care to read. I'd mastered the art of ignoring without deleting, just letting everything pile up, both in my inbox and in my head. At work, everything was predictable. I liked that about it once, the clean desks, the steady rhythm of emails, reports, polite nods at the coffee machine. But predictability has a strange way of becoming a prison when you stop believing in the point of it. I used to think I was ambitious. That word feels ridiculous now. Ambition implies direction, and I had none. I moved forward because stopping felt too much like admitting defeat. Around lunchtime, I sat alone in the small park near the office. There was a man feeding pigeons, a woman talking loudly into her phone, a kid chasing his own shadow. Ordinary scenes, but they hit differently these days. I watched the kid laugh and felt a pang of something I couldn't name. Maybe envy. Maybe nostalgia. Maybe just hunger for something unscheduled, something not on a spreadsheet. It was then that I realized how long it had been since I'd done something unexpected. Not reckless or dramatic, just spontaneous. I couldn't remember the last time I'd said yes to anything that wasn't already in my calendar. The thought made me uncomfortable, like I'd caught myself stealing time from my own life. I finished my sandwich, checked the time, and walked back to the office, pretending not to notice the ache in my chest that had nothing to do with hunger. That night, I lay awake again, watching headlights crawl across my ceiling, thinking about how my life had become a series of routines pretending to be choices. I told myself it wasn't so bad, that everyone felt like this sometimes. But the truth was, I didn't believe it. Not really. Something inside me had started to itch, a quiet restlessness that wouldn't go away. I didn't know it yet, but that restlessness was about to ruin everything, or maybe, finally, fix it. It started on a Thursday. Thursdays were the worst, too far from the weekend to feel hopeful, too close to Monday to start anything meaningful. I was at my desk, half listening to a meeting that could have been an email, scrolling through spreadsheets like a robot. The office lights hummed overhead, a mechanical chorus that somehow managed to sound both sterile and tired. Then the email came. It wasn't for me. At least, it wasn't supposed to be. The subject line was vague, about last night. For a second, I thought it was a mistake, spam maybe, but curiosity has its own gravity. I opened it. There wasn't much inside. Just a few sentences. I meant what I said. I don't regret it. But maybe we should slow down. I don't want to ruin what's left. No name, no signature, just that. At first, I felt nothing. Just confusion, the mild discomfort of reading someone else's secret. I was about to delete it when I noticed the sender's name. Familiar, though not personally. Someone from another department. I'd seen her around, exchanged polite smiles in the hallway. I barely knew her, yet suddenly I knew too much. I closed my laptop, but the word stuck. I don't regret it. It echoed in my mind all afternoon, like a whisper that refused to fade. There was something so raw about it, so human. A mistake, probably. Or maybe not. Either way, it was a glimpse into a life that wasn't mine and that, somehow, made me feel awake for the first time in weeks. When I got home, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I imagined the scene, filled in the blanks like a bored screenwriter. Two people, maybe colleagues, maybe not, caught in something they didn't plan. I knew it was none of my business, but that didn't matter. The thought of someone else's chaos felt strangely refreshing compared to my sterile routine. The next morning, she appeared at the coffee machine. The woman from the email. Her name was Claire, I remembered it now, printed neatly on her ID badge. She smiled, unaware of what I knew, and said good morning. I almost told her she'd sent that message to the wrong person, but something stopped me. A quiet, selfish voice whispered, wait. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe loneliness. I don't know. But instead of correcting her, I just nodded, took my coffee, and walked away pretending nothing had happened, though inside, something had. Over the next few days, I found myself noticing her more. The way she twisted her pen when thinking, how she laughed with her whole face, not just her mouth. Details that shouldn't have mattered. I caught myself looking for her in the cafeteria, checking my inbox too often. It was absurd. She didn't even know me. Then, one afternoon, another email came. This one was blank, just a single question mark in the subject line. No text. No explanation. I stared at it for a long time, wondering if it was meant for me again, or if the universe had decided to play some kind of joke. I replied without thinking. Just one word, yes. The second I hit send, my stomach dropped. I had no idea what I'd just agreed to. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was everything. But as I sat there, staring at my screen, I felt something unfamiliar, a pulse, a spark. The kind of feeling you get when you're standing on the edge of something you can't name yet, knowing that if you take one more step, there's no going back. The following week blurred into a pattern of glances, half-formed thoughts, and unfinished sentences. It's strange how quickly something or someone can take up space in your mind, even when they barely exist in your life. Claire was everywhere now. Not literally, but in the small spaces of my attention, the clink of her cup in the break room, the way she adjusted her hair while reading something on her screen, the faint sound of her laughter floating across the office. I told myself it was nothing, just an idle distraction, but even lies sound hollow when you repeat them too often. I started taking my lunch a few minutes later than usual, just to walk past her desk. Sometimes she'd look up, sometimes not. When she did, she always smiled, not the polite, corporate kind, but something softer. It was enough to unbalance the rest of my day. I tried to convince myself I didn't care whether she remembered that accidental email. She probably didn't. But deep down, I knew she did. There was something in her eyes when we crossed paths, something like recognition mixed with amusement, as if we shared a secret neither of us was supposed to have. On Wednesday, I found myself standing beside her at the elevator. We both reached for the same button, our hands brushing lightly. She laughed an easy, genuine sound that made the fluorescent hallway feel a little less sterile. "Looks like we're going to the same floor," she said. "Seems so," I replied, surprised at how normal my voice sounded, given that my pulse was anything but. There was a pause. The kind that invites words to fill it. But neither of us spoke again until the doors opened. When they did, we stepped out in silence. Still, something had changed. The air between us carried a new weight, charged with possibilities neither of us dared to name. That evening, as I sat at home, I thought about how long it had been since a simple moment could stir me like that. Not because it was romantic, exactly, but because it felt real. Unscripted. In a world of schedules and planned meetings, that accidental touch had felt like a small rebellion against predictability. A reminder that life still had sharp edges. Later that night, I opened my laptop without knowing why. My inbox was full, as usual, but one unread message stood out. From her again. This time, the subject line read, "Did you mean it?" No body text, just that. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I could have ignored it, played dumb, corrected the misunderstanding once and for all. But instead, I typed back 3 words, "Maybe I did." I stared at the screen, not daring to hit send. It was ridiculous, childish, even, but my heart was pounding. I tried to imagine what she might be thinking. Was she testing me? Joking? Or was this all just another accident, a glitch in the messy system of human communication? Before I could decide, my phone buzzed. A message notification from an unknown number, "Coffee tomorrow?" 10 a.m. cafe on 5th. No name, but I didn't need one. It had to be her. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept rehearsing what I might say, knowing it was pointless. Real conversations never go as planned. Somewhere between midnight and dawn, I stopped trying to prepare and just let the thought settle in. Tomorrow could be different. Not necessarily better, not necessarily worse, but different. And that, somehow, was enough to make me feel alive again. When morning came, I stood in front of my closet longer than I should have, trying to choose a shirt that looked casual but not careless. I laughed at myself quietly, how absurd it was, to care so much about something so uncertain. Still, I showed up at the cafe 5 minutes early, pretending I wasn't nervous, pretending I wasn't hoping for something I couldn't even define. She arrived exactly on time, hair slightly windblown, coat unbuttoned, eyes bright with a mix of confidence and caution. "So," she said, sliding into the seat across from me, "was it really an accident?" I smiled, unsure of what answer would make sense anymore. "Does it matter?" She tilted her head, studying me. "Maybe not." And just like that, the air shifted again, subtle, electric, irreversible. The coffee cooled between us faster than we spoke. It wasn't awkward, not exactly, just quiet in that way two people can be when both are listening for what the other isn't saying. Claire stirred her drink, eyes flicking toward the window where the city moved indifferently past us. I kept waiting for something obvious, a confession, a reason, an explanation, but she seemed content to let the silence fill the space. Finally, she looked up. "You never said how you got my message," she said, a small, knowing smile tugging at her mouth. I hesitated, caught between honesty and self-preservation. "It was a mistake," I admitted. "You sent it to the wrong person." "I figured," she said, nodding slowly. "But you replied anyway." That hung there, delicate but heavy. I tried to think of something clever, something that would make me sound less transparent. Instead, I just said, "Maybe I needed to." Her eyes softened. "Me too." It was nothing, really, just 2 words, but they hit me with the quiet force of something true. For a while, we talked about safer things. Work. Books. The weather that couldn't make up its mind. It all felt too normal, like a disguise for something larger we were both pretending not to see. When we left the cafe, the wind had picked up. She walked beside me for a few blocks before stopping at the crosswalk. "I should go," she said. "But, this was nice." "Yeah," I said, meaning it. She smiled again, that same calm smile that didn't reach her eyes, and then she was gone, swallowed by the moving crowd. I stood there longer than I should have, watching until I couldn't tell her from the others. Back at the office, the world felt tilted. My desk looked the same, the endless emails still waiting, but I was different. It's strange how a single conversation can shift the way everything else looks. Like changing the lens on a camera. Even the gray walls seemed sharper, more alive. Then came the message. Not from her this time, but from my manager. "Need to talk. Conference room 2. I walked in expecting another project discussion, maybe a deadline reminder. Instead, he was sitting there with another man, HR, I realized from the badge clipped to his shirt. My pulse spiked. "We received a report," my manager began, his tone careful, practiced. "About inappropriate correspondence between you and a colleague." The words blurred for a second. I felt the floor shift under me. What?" He turned the monitor toward me. There it was, a screenshot of the email thread. Mine. Hers. The whole thing. It was flagged by our compliance system, the HR man said, adjusting his glasses. Personal exchanges through company accounts are a breach of policy. For a moment, I couldn't even speak. Not because I was guilty, though, technically, I was, but because the surrealism of it all hit me like cold water. The tiny, impulsive act that had made me feel alive again was now, apparently, a violation. I didn't mean I started, but the words died halfway. We're not assuming intent, my manager said. But we'll need to review this further. Please avoid contact with Claire until we've resolved it. The meeting ended as quietly as it began. No shouting, no drama, just the polite efficiency of corporate judgment. I walked out in a daze, past the same gray desks, the same blinking monitors, everything unchanged except me. At my desk, I sat staring at my empty inbox, the cursor blinking like a pulse. The irony wasn't lost on me. For weeks, I'd wanted something to happen, something to break the monotony. And now that it had, I didn't know whether to laugh or panic. That evening, as the office emptied, I saw her across the hall. She was gathering her things, eyes down, shoulders tense. She didn't look up. Neither did I. The space between us, once charged with curiosity, now felt electric in a different way, the kind that warns you not to touch. Outside, the wind had grown colder. The streetlights flickered as I walked home, and for the first time in years, I felt the weight of consequence pressing down. I told myself it was just bad luck, a misunderstanding, something that would blow over. But deep down, I knew better. I'd crossed a line without realizing it, not with her, but with myself. And once you cross that kind of line, you can't go back the same. The next few days felt like walking through static. Everyone in the office seemed louder, closer, as if the air itself had turned against me. I caught fragments of conversations that stopped the moment I entered a room. Maybe it was just paranoia. Or maybe not. Either way, I couldn't focus. Every time an email notification pinged, my stomach tightened. Every time the phone rang, I imagined it was HR calling me in again. Claire didn't show up for work on Monday. Or Tuesday. By Wednesday, her desk was stripped bare, no coffee mug, no small cactus in the white ceramic pot, nothing. Just an empty chair facing a blank monitor. I stood there longer than I should have, pretending to look for something I'd lost, though what I'd really lost wasn't tangible. I asked around, casually at first. Hey, have you seen Claire lately? Most people shrugged. One person said she'd taken some time off. Another said she'd quit. No one seemed to know for sure. But everyone seemed to know something. The kind of collective awareness that moves through an office like invisible smoke. By Thursday, I couldn't take it anymore. I opened my email and began typing. I hope you're okay. Then deleted it. Started again. I didn't mean for things to get complicated. Deleted that too. Every sentence sounded wrong, either too heavy or too hollow. Finally, I just wrote, coffee again sometime, and stared at it. Then I closed the window without sending it. That night, I took the long way home, wandering through streets I hadn't walked in years. The city had changed, new cafes, new billboards, same restless pulse. I passed the place where we'd met, the little cafe with the crooked sign. The lights were still on. But inside, everything was different. New faces. No trace of her. I sat by the window anyway, ordered coffee I didn't need, and watched people hurry past outside. For a moment, I felt absurdly disconnected from all of it, like I was behind glass, observing life instead of living it. That's when I saw the message notification on my phone. Unknown number again. Just 3 words, you shouldn't have. I froze. No name. No explanation. My first thought was that it was her. My second was that it wasn't. The words pulsed on the screen, almost alive. I typed back instantly, Claire? No response. For the rest of the evening, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Not in a cinematic, paranoid way, more like the subtle awareness of eyes that used to be friendly but weren't anymore. Maybe it was guilt, or maybe guilt creates its own witnesses. When I came into the office the next morning, there was an envelope on my desk. No name, no logo, just a folded piece of paper inside. One line written in blue pen. They're not done with you. My hand shook as I read it. I looked around, but no one seemed to notice me standing there, heart pounding, letter trembling slightly between my fingers. HR hadn't contacted me again. My manager avoided my eyes. Everything looked normal, and that's what terrified me most. For the rest of the day, I did what I always did, answered emails, smiled at the right moments, pretended to function. But inside, everything buzzed with unease. I couldn't tell if someone was trying to warn me, threaten me, or just mess with my head. That night, I went through my sent messages, searching for anything that could have leaked, any sign that someone else had access. Nothing. Everything looked clean. I even checked the drafts folder, empty. Still, I couldn't sleep. When I finally drifted off, I dreamed of the office, but it wasn't the office anymore. It was underwater, silent and slow, and all the computer screens glowed faintly through the murk. I saw Claire there, too, her hair floating like ink. She looked at me, mouthed something I couldn't hear. Then she turned and walked away, vanishing into the blue haze. I woke up gasping, the image burned behind my eyes. It was just a dream, I told myself. But the truth is, I didn't believe that anymore. Because when I opened my phone that morning, there was another message waiting. From the same number. We need to talk. By the time I left the apartment, the morning light had turned pale and indecisive. I hadn't planned anything specific, I just knew I couldn't sit still anymore. The message still sat on my phone like a stone, we need to talk. No name, no context, but the timing couldn't be coincidence. If it wasn't Claire, then who else could it be? I took the subway downtown, the air thick with the usual rush hour fatigue. Faces blurred together in the reflection of the train window, strangers who all looked like they were going somewhere important. I envied them, their certainty. My only destination was a guess, the cafe. The place where everything had started, or maybe where it had all gone wrong. When I got there, the same barista was behind the counter, though he didn't seem to recognize me. I ordered coffee, sat by the window again, and waited. I checked my phone every few minutes, hoping for a sign. Nothing. Just the same message thread staring back, unanswered. After an hour, I finally asked the barista, "Do you remember a woman, dark hair, came here a lot, maybe last week?" "Claire?" He thought for a moment. "Yeah," he said finally. "She used to come in mornings. Haven't seen her lately, though." "Why? Everything okay?" "Not really," I said before I could stop myself. He gave me a sympathetic look, the kind people give when they don't want to get involved. "Well, she seemed nice," he said, wiping down the counter. "Quiet. But you never really know people, right?" That line stayed with me as I walked out into the noise of the city. You never really know people. Maybe that was true. But lately, it felt like I didn't even know myself. I started retracing small details I remembered: a badge, a floor number, a building ID on her desk. I called HR. Pretending it was a routine follow-up. The woman on the line sounded polite but distant. "I'm sorry," she said, "I can't share information about current or former employees." "So she's gone, then?" A pause. I didn't say that. The line went dead before I could press further. I spent the rest of the day walking without direction, letting the city swallow me. It's strange how even in a crowd, you can feel completely unseen. At one point, I caught my reflection in a shop window and didn't recognize the face looking back, eyes a little darker, posture a little more uncertain. By late afternoon, exhaustion set in. I sat on a bench by the river, the kind of place people go when they want to think or forget. The water was calm, reflecting the dull gold of the setting sun. I thought about how everything had spiraled from something so small, one email, one moment of curiosity, and wondered whether I'd made it all bigger than it really was. Maybe Claire had simply moved on. Maybe I was the only one still trapped in the afterimage. My phone buzzed again. Same number. "Stop looking for me." I froze. The world around me seemed to blur, footsteps, chatter, the low hum of traffic all distant. I typed back before I could think. "Why?" No reply. I waited for minutes that felt like hours, but nothing came. The light dimmed, the air cooled, and I felt a familiar heaviness settle in my chest, the weight of not knowing. I wanted to believe she was trying to protect herself. Or me. But from what? That night, when I finally got home, there was a small envelope slipped under my door. No address, no sender. Inside was a single photograph, grainy, taken from a distance. It was me, sitting in that same park near the river, just hours earlier. No note this time. No explanation. Just proof that I wasn't as alone as I thought. I stared at it for a long time, my mind spinning through possibilities. Maybe she was watching me. Maybe someone else was. Either way, the game, whatever it was, had moved beyond my control. And for the first time, I wasn't sure if I wanted to know the truth anymore. It was raining when it finally happened. Not the cinematic kind of rain that makes everything look meaningful, just the steady, gray kind that blurs edges and hides faces. I'd almost given up by then. A week had passed since the last message. The photo still sat on my desk, mocking me with its silence. That morning, as I stood at the bus stop, I saw her. At first, I wasn't sure: a dark coat, hair pulled back, umbrella tilted just enough to hide her face. But when she turned, it was unmistakable. Claire. For a second, I froze. I'd imagined this moment so many times that when it finally arrived, I didn't know what to do. By the time I moved, she had already crossed the street. "Claire." I called. She stopped. Slowly turned. Our eyes met across the traffic, just a few meters, but it felt like miles. She didn't smile. Didn't wave. Just looked at me, expression unreadable. Then, almost imperceptibly, she shook her head. I didn't care. I ran across anyway, dodging a car that honked angrily as it passed. When I reached her, she was already walking away. "Please, wait," I said. She didn't. I caught up, falling into step beside her. "I need to know what's going on," I said, the words tumbling out faster than I could control. "You sent me those messages, didn't you?" She kept walking. "You shouldn't have replied," she said finally, voice low. "Then why send them?" She glanced at me, eyes sharp. "Because I wanted to see if you would." We stopped under an awning, rain whispering against the metal roof. She looked different, older somehow, more fragile around the eyes. "They found out about the emails," I said. "HR. They think." "I know," she interrupted. "They talked to me too." "What did you tell them?" "The truth," she said softly. "That it was an accident. That we barely knew each other." Her words hit like a slap. "Barely?" She looked down. "It was nothing, really. A mistake that got out of hand." I laughed, not because it was funny but because it hurt. "Right. Just an accident." "I didn't mean to hurt you," she said. "You didn't," I lied. The silence that followed was heavier than the rain. I wanted to ask her if she'd sent the photo, if she was the one watching me, if she meant any of it. But looking at her, I already knew the answers wouldn't matter. She stepped closer, just enough that I could smell the faint trace of her perfume, something clean, floral, painfully familiar. "You were looking for something," she said quietly. "It wasn't me." "What does that mean?" She met my eyes, and for the first time, I saw the fear there. "You wanted to feel alive again. And for a moment, you did. Don't turn that into something else." I wanted to argue, but the words wouldn't come. Because deep down, I knew she was right. This wasn't about her. It never had been. It was about the small, empty space inside me I'd been trying to fill with anything that moved or shimmered or looked like meaning. "Goodbye," she said, and started walking away. This time, I didn't follow. I stood there, watching her fade into the rain, until the street emptied and the only thing left was the sound of water hitting pavement. When I finally turned to go, I noticed something on the ground near the wall, a folded piece of paper, wet but legible. I picked it up. My name was written on it, in her handwriting. Inside, just one sentence. You have to stop waiting for someone else to change your life. I don't remember how long I stood there, reading that line over and over. Maybe minutes. Maybe longer. The rain had soaked through my clothes by then, but I didn't care. Because in that moment, something in me cracked, not in the way things break, but in the way walls do when light finally finds a way through. The next morning, the city smelled like rain and asphalt, that faint, metallic freshness that only comes after a storm. I walked to work slower than usual, not because I was tired, but because I didn't feel the usual rush to get anywhere. The world felt quieter, like someone had turned down the volume on everything. Claire's words still echoed in my head. You were looking for something. It wasn't me. I repeated them over and over as if testing their weight, and each time they felt a little truer. When I reached the office, no one looked up. The usual hum of conversation filled the air, coffee machines hissing in the background, keyboards clicking in rhythm. Life had gone on without me, as it always does. Her desk was still empty, and this time I didn't linger. I went straight to mine, opened my laptop, and stared at the blank screen. For the first time in weeks, I didn't check my messages. I didn't wait for the next notification or rehearse imaginary conversations. I just sat there, breathing, realizing how much time I'd spent waiting for something outside myself to fix the stillness inside. At lunch, I went outside. The park looked different now, not because anything had changed, but because I had. The same pigeons, the same people on benches, the same sunlight breaking through the leaves. But I noticed things I hadn't before, the sound of a child laughing behind me, the sharp scent of freshly cut grass, the uneven rhythm of footsteps passing by. I bought a sandwich and sat on the same bench as before, the one I'd used to watch other people's lives. For a moment, I felt the faint sting of regret, all that energy spent chasing meaning in someone else's reflection. But right behind that regret, something softer emerged, relief. I pulled the letter from my pocket, the one Claire had left me, and read it again. You have to stop waiting for someone else to change your life. The ink had smudged slightly, but the words were still clear. I smiled, not because it made me happy, but because it finally made sense. We think revelation comes like lightning, sudden, dramatic, impossible to miss. But most of the time, it's quieter. It's a sentence in someone else's handwriting. A morning where you notice the world breathing again. A moment when you stop chasing and start listening. That afternoon, I went back to work and did something small but radical. I deleted my entire inbox. All of it. Every unread message, every chain of polite exchanges, every fragment of digital noise pretending to be purpose. For a moment, the empty screen looked terrifying, blank, wide, infinite. Then it looked beautiful. When I left the office, the sky was clear, the kind of blue that feels earned after rain. I took the long route home again, passing the cafe one last time. It was nearly empty, the barista wiping down tables. I almost walked by, but then I stopped. Inside, the same seat by the window was free. I ordered coffee and sat down, not waiting for anyone this time. I watched the street, people laughing, running for buses, carrying groceries, arguing into their phones, and felt something I hadn't in a long time, connection. Not to anyone in particular, but to everything at once. A woman at the next table dropped her napkin, and I handed it back. She smiled, said thank you, and for a fleeting second, I felt the same spark I'd once mistaken for destiny. Only now, it didn't consume me. It just passed through, gentle and ordinary, like sunlight through glass. Maybe that was the real point all along, not to find the person who would make my life feel whole, but to realize it already was, if I just stopped running from it. Weeks passed. The city slipped back into its rhythm, and so did I, though it didn't feel like the same rhythm anymore. The mornings weren't as heavy. I still woke early, still made coffee, still stared at the same ceiling with its stubborn cracks. But now, instead of counting them, I watched how the light filled them. It sounds small, maybe even meaningless, but it wasn't. It was the difference between noticing what's wrong and seeing what is. At work, things slowly settled. HR never called me in again. My manager returned to his usual clipped greetings. The silence that had once felt accusatory now felt merciful, like the world was giving me space to start over quietly, without fanfare. Sometimes I thought about Claire, though less often as the days went by. The memory of her had changed shape, no longer a sharp ache, but a soft echo, like the outline of something you once leaned against. I didn't resent her. If anything, I was grateful. She had been a mirror I hadn't wanted to face, and when it shattered, the pieces finally reflected the truth. One afternoon, I decided to walk home instead of taking the subway. The city was alive in the golden light, kids running through sprinklers, a street musician playing a battered guitar, the scent of something sweet drifting from a bakery. I bought a pastry I didn't need and ate it slowly, standing on the corner just to feel the sun on my face. A man nearby was sketching in a notebook. I glanced at his page and saw he was drawing the skyline, but not perfectly. Some buildings leaned slightly, windows uneven, proportions off. Yet somehow it looked more real that way, more human. I asked if he sold his drawings. He smiled. Sometimes, he said. But mostly I just draw them so I remember how I saw them. That stayed with me as I walked on. Maybe that's all any of us are doing, drawing versions of life so we can remember how we once saw it, even if the lines aren't perfect. When I reached my building, the air smelled faintly of rain again, even though the sky was clear. I stopped for a moment, listening to the city hum, the laughter, the engines, the distant sound of music from an open window. All of it blending into something that felt strangely harmonious. Inside my apartment, everything was exactly as I'd left it, but different in the way familiar places become new after you return changed. I opened the window and let the air in. It moved gently through the curtains, brushing against my face like a quiet hello. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was waiting. Not for messages, not for apologies, not for anyone else to tell me what to do next. The emptiness that had once scared me now felt like space, wide, open, full of possibility. That evening, I opened a blank document on my laptop. Not an email, not a report, just a page with nothing on it. I typed one sentence, then deleted it. Then another. Eventually, I just left it blank, and that blankness felt right. Maybe I didn't need to fill every silence. Maybe silence itself was a kind of answer. Before going to bed, I stepped out onto the balcony. The city lights stretched out in every direction, steady and alive. Somewhere, someone laughed. Somewhere, a siren wailed. Somewhere, life kept unfolding, messy and beautiful and absolutely indifferent, and I was part of it, finally, without needing to control it. And as I stood there, breathing it all in, I realized something simple but solid: peace doesn't arrive like a thunderclap. It seeps in quietly, like light through a window you forgot to close. A few months later, winter began to loosen its grip. The mornings grew brighter, the air a little softer. The city no longer looked hostile, just alive in its own indifferent way. People hurried past with their scarves and coffees, and for once I didn't feel separate from them. I was part of the movement again, part of the quiet machinery of days turning into other days. My life hadn't changed in any grand, cinematic way. I still had the same job, the same apartment, the same coffee maker that rattled when it boiled. But something beneath the surface had shifted, the way the world tilted slightly toward me instead of away. One Saturday, I took a walk without a destination. The streets were familiar, but the air felt new. I wandered into a bookstore I'd passed 100 times but never entered. Inside, it smelled like dust and paper and something faintly sweet, like memory. I browsed without purpose, running my fingers along spines, reading titles I didn't recognize. A woman stood at the same shelf, her hair tucked into a wool hat, her coat dusted with melting snow. She looked up and smiled, not the kind of smile that means anything special, just the natural reflex of two strangers sharing space. But somehow it was enough to make the moment feel whole. We talked briefly about books, weather, nothing that mattered, and then drifted our separate ways. Still, as I left the shop, I caught myself smiling. Not because I wanted anything from that encounter, but because it reminded me that connection doesn't need to be monumental to be real. Outside, the light had changed again, that golden edge that makes everything look softer. I stopped by the river, the same spot where months ago I'd felt watched, lost, hollow. The water moved slowly, steady and sure, carrying fragments of ice downstream. I leaned against the railing, the cold metal grounding me in the moment. For the first time, I didn't think about Claire. Or rather, I did, but not as a wound or a mystery. Just as a chapter. A necessary detour. The kind you don't regret, even if it hurt, because it took you somewhere you couldn't have reached otherwise. I pulled out my phone. The old messages were gone, deleted along with everything else, but the last one, the photograph, was still saved in my gallery. I looked at it one more time, me, sitting on that park bench, unaware I was being watched. It felt like a ghost of another life. Then I deleted it. Not in anger or sadness, just because it didn't belong anymore. The city stretched before me, endless and ordinary. People were laughing somewhere nearby, a street musician was tuning his guitar, the world kept spinning. I took a deep breath, the cold air burning in my lungs, and it felt good, clean, sharp, alive. Maybe that was all any of us ever got, moments. Not answers, not resolutions, just flashes of understanding that remind us we're still here, still trying, still human. I turned and began walking home. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Each step felt deliberate, like writing a sentence I finally meant. The sound of my shoes against the pavement echoed softly in rhythm with my heartbeat, steady, calm, certain. As I crossed the street, a gust of wind caught my coat, and I laughed, unexpectedly. The sound surprised me, light, effortless, true. And for the first time in a very long while, I wasn't thinking about what came next. I was already in it.